He is a New York Times bestselling author, and his latest book, LeBron, goes on sale April 11th. We welcome Jeff Benedict onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's a pleasure.
And thanks for coming on to the show. Both Matt and I really been looking forward to this interview. I can speak for Matt. He is a huge LeBron fan. I'm a LeBron fan too, but he is a huge LeBron fan since I've known him. So this is an awesome just interview we're looking forward to. So it's a basic question for you, Jeff. Just talking off air, just you mentioned that huge wasn't just a word to describe just the undertaking of this book. Can you kind of take us into just the creative process of just like where do you start with LeBron James's career? Because I have to imagine it has to be just it's such an intense undertaking.
It is. This is my third book in a row on someone who's considered in the conversation for greatest of all time. I did Tiger Woods' biography, and then The Dynasty, which was very much a Tom Brady centric story, and now LeBron. And I follow the same process in each of these books, which in the beginning, it's labor intensive in terms of research. So it's reading, I mean, literally thousands of pages in the form of books, transcripts, articles. It's a lot of information gathering in the beginning, and just trying to get acclimated to who the person is, the subject of this kind of an undertaking. And it really, to me, it's a daunting task when you. It's like looking up at a mountain that's so high you can't see the top when you start. And so the idea of starting to climb towards something that you can't see the top of is, to me at least, it's an intimidating process. And I'm not too embarrassed to admit that this was an intimidating process for me. But I like that because to me, when you're a little scared about what you're doing, I think you do better because you don't take any days off, you don't take anything for granted, you work harder, um, and I think you need that kind of approach when you're trying to do a portrait of someone's life that's as big and grand and accomplished as someone like LeBron James. It deserves a level of commitment that goes beyond just let's do a good job. Good isn't good enough. And so that's really kind of how I feel and how I felt when I went into this one.
So during the first parts of his life have been well chronicled. I was in high school. I'm around the same age as LeBron. I remember his games being televised on ESPN. I remember the Sports Illustrated cover. I remember just every move that he made was so highly scrutinized. In your research, was there anything that surprised you just regarding teenage LeBron before he got into the NBA? Just like all that pressure on this teenage kid. I mean, he's a kid. And just yet he has a lot of these adult responsibilities. Was there anything in your research that surprised you, just revealing that?
There was a lot. I think that I spent a lot of time in this book on LeBron's origin story. I mean, you're almost halfway through the book before he gets to the NBA. And the reason I spent that much time on those pre-NBA years is because I think that to really understand who LeBron James is, you have to go deep on his childhood and his adolescent years, the formative years. I would say the same thing about understanding Tiger Woods or Tom Brady. Those origin stories are, to me, a lot more important um, than the professional stories, because in the professional stories, you're really seeing the culmination of those early years. And so in LeBron's case, I think Akron and his mother and his group of teenage friends and their fathers, those male figures who get involved in LeBron's life when he doesn't have a father in his life. It's, there's a cliche about it takes a village and it gets way overused, but in LeBron's case, it actually is legitimate, it's real. And I think there's so many tragic stories of aspiring young athletes who crash and burn for so many reasons, all the tripwires and landmines that are in the way. LeBron has a great cocoon around him as a kid, and it's really in the community of Akron. The men and women who are in LeBron's life early have such a role in what he is today. And one of the things that I like about LeBron's story so much is that he has a great memory. And we've seen that memory, like when he recounts plays. Some reporter in a press conference says, "What was going on this particular play?" And LeBron can take you right to that moment and describe what 9 other players were doing. But I'm not talking about that memory. As impressive as that is, what I think is a lot more impressive is how well LeBron remembers people who did things for him and what it was like to be him as a boy. He remembers that, and so many people, when they get famous and they get wealthy and they get successful, they forget the people who helped make them. And one of the things that's most impressive about LeBron is he doesn't forget.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Just considering, many would say that the upbringing was chaotic there, and yet he was able to find that stability. And really, in his personal life, I mean, other than some decisions. I mean, politics are always controversial nowadays in the modern era, but really, if you look at his personal life, I mean, married his high school sweetheart, seems to be a very present father. Um, is How was he able to, I guess, aside from that community around him, I mean, he essentially was a childhood star who lived up to the hype
Yeah.
that was unreal coming in. I mean, beyond that village that was around him, I mean, was it really kind of a case for diving deeply into that, the extracurricular activity that was basketball as well, that kind of helped to keep him out of trouble and enforce that village? Or what else did you see as you were, researching that upbringing?
Well, I think, the traditional conventional thinking is that, when you're fatherless growing up, and I speak from a little bit of experience because I was. And so, I mean, my mother had me, you know, before she got pregnant with me when she wasn't married and she was still a teenager. And I remember the difficulty of not having a dad and what you sort of think about as a kid because everyone around you has a dad. And so the conventional wisdom is that, or thinking is that, when you don't have a dad, that's a disadvantage, the absence of a father figure. And so I
Mm,
think what's remarkable here, first of all, LeBron has an incredibly strong and gritty mother. And the bond between them is something that you can't dismiss or overlook the significance of that. And then the fact that he met certain men and women. I don't want to discount the wives of these men, but the men who coached him, not just on the basketball court or the pee wee football field, but who coached him in life. And they were the same men. The sports coaches were also coaching him in other ways, mainly by modeling. He saw what it was like to be a responsible dad by watching the dads who were coaching him. And these were really good fathers. They were involved. They were donating countless hours to their own sons and their teenage friends, giving up tons of time to not just teach them basketball, but to show them what it means to be respectful, what it means to be a man, what it means to show good sportsmanship. I mean, literally, those things are the difference between growing up a certain way and aspiring to certain principles. I love that story where his young youth coach teaches him about the importance of sharing the ball. If you pass the ball, kids will want to play with you. And LeBron seized on that. Like he wanted to be wanted by other kids. And so it's a powerful lesson that goes beyond basketball that he learns early. And I just think that having those kinds of influences in his life as a youth, it's hard to overemphasize the significance of those things.
Um, Jeff, I just want to transition into how LeBron deals with criticism. And I think his career's lasted so long that he's pretty much transcended different types of media, from just the sports talk era to the rise of social media to where we are now. Just through your research and putting together the book, how does he cope with that? Because I think a lot of critics, I will say his name, Skip Bayless, just they're totally unfounded, and they just have like a personal grudge against him that is unfounded. And
Right.
just uh, from just you tracking his career, in your opinion, how does he deal with that? Because I know for myself, I couldn't imagine being in that position, somebody that's taking cheap shots at me consistently, and
Yeah.
those claims being unfounded 95% of the time. So how does he cope with that?
Well, one of the things is I think you have to look at where it all started for LeBron. You mentioned earlier the hype that he lived up to. LeBron was exposed to national media, never mind local media. I mean, I went back and was looking at articles in the Akron Beacon Journal of LeBron as a pee-wee football player. Like
Wow.
his name is in the Akron Beacon Journal as a little kid scoring touchdowns. Like that in itself is kind of unusual. But by the time he's a sophomore in high school, he is meeting reporters from the Chicago Tribune, from the New York Times. I mean, when Ira Burkow profiled him before the ABCD Adidas camp after LeBron's sophomore year, I mean, that is a remarkable thing. Just this is before Grant Wall comes along and puts him on the cover of Sports Illustrated as a junior. LeBron has remarkable exposure to some of the most accomplished national writers in the country when he's in high school. The reason this is important, I think, in understanding how he deals with public criticism today is that by LeBron's senior year, he goes from his junior year, where he is the toast of the country. He's on ESPN, national games. He's on the cover of SI in what was a very positive story, to suddenly being on the cover of ESPN magazine in what was not considered a positive story in many aspects, because it got into things that were critical of LeBron's mother, of LeBron's father figure, Eddie Jackson. So for most, it's really hard, I think, for adults to understand what it would be like to be 17 years old and have your personal life, have your mother being taken to task in a national magazine when you're in high school. And then to suddenly be suspended because someone has an axe to grind against you because you got a couple of throwback jerseys at a store in Cleveland, and suddenly you've been suspended, you can't finish your high school career, you're all over you're on CNN with Wolf Blitzer because of this. And so I think none of that was fun, by the way. It was not a pleasant experience
Mhm.
for him and his mother, but you learn a lot when you go through something like that, and you start to see where you can trust people and where you can't trust people. And you actually build up reasons to not trust very many people. And I think LeBron, he developed really thick skin really young, and got to the point where you just have to understand that there's going to be a lot of stuff said about you, a lot of stuff written about you that isn't going to be true. It isn't going to be fair. It isn't going to be pleasant. And anyone who's in your orbit is fair game. And I think that explains why early on he was so protective of his girlfriend, and of his young boys when they were first born and growing up. He kept them out of the spotlight, and he did a really good job of insulating them and insulating his mother because of what he had been through at such an early age.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people mention, that LeBron with, his PR team, his appearances in media, etc. He's very, very much, I guess, calculated would be the way to put it. I mean, he's also, of course, master tactician on the basketball court. But do you think that comes specifically from those early lessons learned and those early controversies being right away in that national spotlight? I mean, LeBron is still, of course, very active on social media and things like that. But I do think that there is still that level of insulation. And I think that's healthy too, for the record.
He needs to have insulation because, I mean, you can use all the adjectives and verbs you want about it being calculated, careful, and designed. Of course, it's all those things. It should be all those things. This is a guy who's been selling out arenas literally selling out arenas since he was 16 years old. He is he's sports's version of a rock star. I mean, he is a great entertainer. And so find me a great entertainer, anyone in show business, Tom Cruise, Bono, Lady Gaga, name it, Jay-Z. Of course, they're very concerned and careful about protecting their image and their privacy and all that, and they should be. And so LeBron has got to a point, and he's been there for a long time now. There's a certain sophistication around his communications in his media. He has hired really smart people to help him and to guide that process. But along the way, LeBron's been doing this long enough, and there's an authenticity to what he does that it's great. Like when he's on Twitter, it's him. It's not somebody else. It's him. And I think that's one of the reasons that his social media is so powerful and effective, is because it is authentically him.
Do you have a sense, with everything that you've looked at? I mean, there's so much that LeBron has accomplished in his career. Justin mentioned it earlier that he stands among the greats in any sport. Do you get kind of a sense of what LeBron would like his overall legacy to be, as we approach the last couple years of his career, in what already, as we mentioned, is a 20-year career?
Well, I just think all you have to do is look at you can look at what he said over the course of his career, but maybe more importantly than what he said is look at what he has done. And I think, and this is an example of action speaking louder than words. When he was in high school, I love this anecdote, right? Jay Brophy, his high school football coach, talked about how amazing it was to have a kid on his high school football team who could talk about Walter Payton with great knowledge. Walter Payton was retired before LeBron was old enough to know anything about Walter Payton. But LeBron knew, he knew actual NFL history, not just the players that were playing when he was watching, but he knew the greats. And why is that? Because he actually cared about the history of football, and he would watch ESPN classics. Well, basketball is to another level. And I think one of the things that so many of the veteran coaches and players appreciated about LeBron when he entered the NBA was his institutional knowledge of the game and the history of the game. I mean, his first NBA coach, Paul Silas, one of the things he admired and loved about LeBron was LeBron knew who the pioneers of the NBA were. He respected the Oscar Robertsons, the Bill Russells. He knew not only their names, but what they did. And there was a certain reverence about sort of the forefathers. And I think, yes, LeBron saw himself early as someone who he was going to get in that lane that those guys were in and be one of those greats. But when he came into the league, he had a deep sort of reverence and appreciation for who those guys were. That's not common among young stars. And so I think in terms of legacy, LeBron saw himself when he came into the league as someone, he wanted to match that greatness and get there. And, frankly, we've all seen him do that.
So I want to ask you, Jeff, about, I guess, on that legacy point, how fans view him, because Matt and I grew up with Jordan and we have a huge reverence for him, but there wasn't social media back then. So his access was different. We weren't exposed to his flaws compared to LeBron with the youth now exposed to that. But it's so much different access because, like you were saying with social media, it's him. You get to know him on TikTok, Instagram, etc. So when his legacy is all said and done, what is the reference for LeBron going to be like? Is it going to be similar to Jordan, or is it going to be quite different in terms of just the younger fans of this era, really considering LeBron to go and just watching Jordan on YouTube? Just
Right.
what is kind of their, I guess, frame of reference compared to Matt and I? We can't really relate to that. We're older. So just what is that kind of relationship like in terms of actually, the youth actually watching the NBA now, holding
Right.
LeBron to this GOAT standard?
Right. It's a great question. And it's actually, to some degree, this is one of the beauties of sports, right? It's why guys like us love sports so much,
Yeah.
is because these are great debates, right? And it's not like debating politics. This is a little more fun, and you can actually have great arguments about it. But I think there's always going to be legitimate debate about these generational players, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, right? Then comes Kareem. Then comes Magic and Larry. Then comes Michael. Then Kobe. Then LeBron. It's a wonderful spectrum, and in some cases there's a little bit of overlap. Like
Yeah.
Kobe and Michael actually played against each other, and Kobe and LeBron played against each other, but LeBron and Michael didn't. And so there is no way to actually say what would they have done head to head, because they didn't get to do that. Just as Michael really didn't get to go head to head, certainly with guys like Chamberlain and Russell. And so I think it's dangerous for anybody other than those guys that we just mentioned, to start talking about who's the greatest of all time. I mean, I think the safe place to be is look at what they have said. Like when Michael was asked in his prime about being the greatest of all time, he said he didn't want to be called that, and he didn't want to be compared to Russell because of how different the game was from when Russell played and when Michael played. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, like from Michael. And I think the danger from guys like us is saying, well, I saw Michael. It doesn't matter whether you saw Michael or LeBron. I watched both those guys play. That doesn't really qualify me to say which one's the greatest of all time. But here's a different thing about legacy, because that's what you're asking. And I think LeBron's legacy, I feel much more comfortable like putting a stake in the ground and saying LeBron's legacy is going to be very different than Michael's. It's a much broader footprint. LeBron was fearless and bold about venturing into land that Michael wouldn't step in when he was a player. And I think it took LeBron a little while to get there. The first half of his career, he steered very clear of politics and things that were controversial. And to his credit, he focused strictly on basketball. And when he was an Olympian, he took a lot of criticism for that because he wouldn't criticize China. And that was the first time that he was exposed to political controversy, and he saw himself as a bit of a pinball in that thing. And he had people like Coach Krzyzewski, his Olympic coach, saying, why should he weigh in on something like that? He shouldn't. But eventually, LeBron gets more comfortable. And a lot of that has to do with the timing of Barack Obama deciding to run for president, Jay-Z getting behind Barack Obama's candidacy, encouraging LeBron to come along and get involved in some campaigning. And little by little, LeBron starts to inch his way into this other forum. And around the same time, he starts stepping into the fashion world. And he starts doing it at a time when it was certainly not politically correct for an athlete of his stature to start doing some of the things and wearing some of the things that LeBron was wearing. And that's what I mean about fearlessness and being unafraid to go into some deep water that he'd never swam in before. And this is where LeBron's legacy starts to get really wide. And I think that that's the thing is, by the time you get to the Trump administration, LeBron is a very fully formed man in terms of being much more than a basketball player or an athlete. His impact on society and on the world is just different than Michael Jordan's ever was. Michael was an incredible entertainer. You'd be hard pressed to point to any athlete in the last 50 years who you could say was a better entertainer than Michael Jordan. Who would that be? I mean, he's right there with Muhammad Ali in terms of and Tiger Woods as the greatest entertainer ever from sports. But that's where it stops, right? Michael was a cultural phenomenon in that area. LeBron's footprint is so much bigger that when it's all said and done, you have to look at this man built a school. He didn't just give money, he built a school in his home city that feeds, clothes, and educates children. It's like, okay, that's a full stop right there. Like, who else has done that in sports? And so, and it just goes on and on with him. And that's why I think when you talk about his legacy, LeBron is already a mogul in Hollywood, and he's still a player. When Jim Brown went to Hollywood, he left football to go to Hollywood. LeBron's been in Hollywood for like 13 years. So it's hard to wrap your mind around the legacy of LeBron James. It's way bigger than basketball.
Jeff, with the extensive research that you've done for the past 3 books that you mentioned, which, as you also mentioned, focus around some of the athletes that are considered GOATs. Are there similarities that you see between those 3 that you did that extensive research on? So like Tiger Woods, Tom Brady, and LeBron James, namely.
I mean, the obvious areas of similarity have to do purely with athletics and mastery. You know, you're looking at 3 master craftsmen, and I don't use that word lightly. When you look at the way Tiger Woods plays golf, the way Tom Brady played quarterback, and the way LeBron James plays basketball, it's a craft. I mean, they're master craftsmen. And along the way, they're also phenomenal athletes. Everybody likes to make jokes about Tom Brady's athleticism. That's a bunch of baloney. I mean, Tom is an amazing athlete.
True.
Um, and LeBron and Tiger are phenomenal athletes. But I look at those guys like they're like Picasso. They're like, you know, Einstein in science. There's, in other words, it doesn't matter how many times LeBron won the MVP or Brady won the MVP or how many majors Tiger has won compared to Jack Nicholson. None of that matters. The reality is they're one of a kind in the world, right? That's what they are. And there's no one else like them. And so I don't care how many MVPs Brady and LeBron have won. We all know that there could be a case for LeBron being the MVP every single year that he's in the NBA. And it would be hard to argue with giving it to him any of those years. And you could say the same thing about Brady, except for the year he missed with injury. You know, after 2005, he's like the guy every year. And so I think that that's the major similarity is their commitment to excellence, and their drive is it's further than everybody else. What they do with their bodies is different than everybody else. LeBron's body is more like a machine, and that's not just natural. He's not just blessed that way. Yes, he's blessed with a great athletic body. Of course he is. But this man's had to work like a machine to get that body to stay that way. Tom has worked like a machine to have his body do what it did to 45. And for Tiger Woods to come back from the injuries that he has sustained and perform the way he has, is there's just no one else in the world of golf. Jack Nicklaus is not in that universe in terms of the physical conditioning of Tiger. But that's probably where most of the similarities stop. You know, I think when you look into their personal lives, there's lots of uniqueness about them. I mean, I guess the commonality that you could point to is I think all 3 of them are incredibly devoted fathers, and they're deeply involved in their children's lives. That is not necessarily common for star entertainers. I'm not talking about athletes. I'm talking about world-class entertainers. And so to be a world-class entertainer and to be as deeply involved in the lives of their kids as those 3 men are, that is unusual. And it's legit with all 3 of them. Tom, LeBron, Tiger. That's not for show. They're in their kids' lives, deeply invested in it. But the nice thing about it is the 3 guys are really different in a lot of the things they do in their personalities, right? LeBron is a super funny guy. He could be a professional comedian. He could be an actor. He's got this great charismatic personality. Tom is, you know, this wonderfully sensitive human being. Like he's one of the, sort of purest souls you're ever going to meet. It's just like, wow, like it makes you go like, how did his parents raise him like that? It's like, whoa. And then there's Tiger, who had this super unusual upbringing with his mom and dad, and he was really groomed from the time he was, you know, a foot high to become what he is. And it was the perfect grooming for a sport that is all about solitude and being alone and being on your own. And that is Tiger. LeBron hates to be alone. Tiger is all about being alone. So there's a lot of fascinating differences in their personal lives in that way.
Jeff, this has been a fantastic chat. Please let our audience know where they can find you on social media. Again, when the book comes out, your other works, just anything else you want our audience to know.
I'm laughing because I am my presence on social media is small because I'm not a big fan of it, but I am on Twitter and Instagram at author Jeff, and but my website jeffbenedict.com is where I really showcase the books and the work and the film projects, and it's been great to really research and study. To me, I'm fascinated in is excellence, and I think the three LeBron certainly is that, as are Tiger and Tom.
Fantastic, Jeff. Thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you, guys. Privilege.